See the turtle of enormous girth, on his shell he holds the earth. His thought is slow but always kind, he holds us all within his mind. On his back all vows are made, he sees the truth but may not say. He loves the land and loves the sea, and even loves a child like me. I'm Luke Summerhays, and I love Turtwig. I first encountered the idea of a world turtle when I saw my mother's vast collection of Terry Pratchett novels on the shelves. In the Discworld series, the world is a flat disc, held aloft by 4 elephants, themselves atop the shell of a giant turtle. This image of the world turtle, either literally under our feet or metaphorically encompassing the earth as a god, is an old and somewhat prevalent myth. In various Hindu mythology, the world turtle Akapura, which may or may not also be Kurma, a form of the god Vishnu, holds up either the earth itself or the sky. In Chinese mythology, the legs of an enormous sea turtle hold up the sky, and both of these mythologies were well known in ancient Japan, so I've seen statuary at many Buddhist sites of dragon-headed turtles bearing temples or Buddhas on their backs. Myself, I'm always reminded of the god Maturin from the Stephen Kingdom, and in particular the Dark Tower series and the horror story It. I'm also, of course, always reminded of Turtwig. Turtwig is the grass-type starter Pokémon in the Sinnoh region, obtained from Professor Rowan at first simply to return his briefcase, and eventually as a permanent partner. It is the heaviest of all first form starter Pokémon, and resembles a cute little green turtle with a thin twin-leafed tree growing from its head and a brown shell. Platinum tells us of that shell. The shell on its back is made of soil. On a very healthy Turtwig, the shell should feel moist. Interestingly, a turtle with soil and a tree on its back is less like the Asian world turtle, and more like the Great Turtle or Turtle Island, from the mythologies of the indigenous peoples of the northeastern woodlands of North America. In these myths, dirt from the bottom of the ocean was brought to a turtle floating at the top. The dirt on this turtle's back grows into the land, and from it grew a great tree, which sprouted 2 leaves, becoming the first 2 people. And Turtwig maintains a water connection. Pokémon Diamond tells us, made from soil, the shell on its back hardens when it drinks water. It lives along lakes. And Pokémon Pearl tells us, it undertakes photosynthesis with its body, making oxygen. The leaf on its head wilts if it is thirsty. The name Turtwig obviously combines turtle with twig, referring to the small plant on its head. The Japanese name is Nital, combining turtle with nai, or sprout. In the anime, Ash had a Turtwig, and his, like all Turtwigs can from level 18, soon evolved into a Grotle. Grotle is a larger turtle. Again, it is the heaviest of all starters at its evolutionary stage, even heavier than some fully evolved starters. The shell and the tree on its head have joined up, making Grotle somewhat resemble an ankylosaurus. The small tree on Turtwig's head has developed into some bushy greenery with extensive roots. Pokémon Diamond tells us, it lives along water in forests. In the daytime, it leaves the forest to sunbathe its treed shell. And Pokémon Pearl tells us, the shell is hardened soil. Some Pokémon come to peck the berries growing on the tree on its back. Of course, plant and animal hybrids on the scale of a Pokémon game are not seen in the real world. That said, it isn't hard to find pictures of turtles with a big wedge of soil on their back, with plants in the soil, or with moss growing on them, or for the really big turtles, whole communities of small plants and animals living on their backs. Some of these pictures look every bit a Pokémon, and some of them are a result of snapping turtles hibernating for a long while in the soil, so that when they stand up the soil is still on them. But others spend their whole lives swimming around with these little communities growing on their backs. The name Grotle combines grow and turtle, as this turtle has grown. The Japanese name for the Pokémon is Hayashigame, from Hayashi or grove and Kame, turtle. Pokémon Legends Arceus tells us, appears where there is clean spring water. The fruit that grows on the shrubs on its shell is sweet, nutritious, and truly delicious. As with Tropius, I find something quite unsavoury about the idea of eating fruit growing from a Pokémon, but at least in this case it's not literally part of the Pokémon, it's just growing on its back. That said, other Pokédex entries are entirely wholesome. Platinum tells us, "It knows where pure water wells up. It carries fellow Pokémon there, on its back." While Grotle is carrying other Pokémon on its back to springs, soon it will be carrying the many HM slaves on your team needed for a Sinnoh playthrough, when, at level 32, Grotle evolves into Torterra. Torterra is the ultimate expression of this world turtle Pokémon idea. On its back is now a cute Japanese garden, mossy flooring, some rock-like spikes, and a moderately sized tree. Legends Arceus tells us, "This remarkable, large-bodied Pokémon would serve beautifully as borrowed scenery for a garden, and its strength is peerless. Torterra roams the wilderness in search of clean water." The addition of more spikes make it even closer to an Ankylosaurus than Grotle was, and it's now about the size of one too. It is a grass and ground type, starting a trend for this generation's starters of reversing the type effectiveness triangle seen at the start of the game. The ground type means it is now effective against the fire starter which used to bully it, but more susceptible to the water starter. It also means that Torterra competitively is not that powerful. A grass type that can be injured by water is, a hindrance. That said, Torterra did have a pretty cool running in the anime, where both Ash and his rival Pool had a big bad Torterra on their team. Pokémon Diamond tells us, "Small Pokémon occasionally gather on its unmoving back to begin building their nests." And this idea is exaggerated in Pokémon Platinum's entry, making Torterra genuinely a small world turtle. "Some Pokémon are born on Torterra's back and spend their entire life there." And in the Heart Gold and Soul Silver entries, scale it all the way to a real-world myth. "Ancient people imagined that beneath the ground a gigantic Torterra dwelled." In the live-action movie Detective Pikachu, Tim and Pikachu encounter a Pokémon lab where experiments are being done on Torterra sizes. At first they see some Torterra milling about in a garden and aren't impressed, but later the world beneath their feet begins to move.
I get it now! This isn't a forest at all! This is the Torterra Garden!
The Pokédex in Pearl set this idea up, albeit on a smaller scale. "Groups of this Pokémon migrating in search of water have been mistaken for moving forests." The name Torterra combines tortoise with the terra firma, the very ground beneath our feet. And it also brings to mind terrapins, a relative of turtles, and the idea of a terrarium, a small artificial garden. The Japanese name is Dodaitois, a combination of tortoise and dodai, or foundations. That word, dodai, though, is made up of do, or large, and dai, ground. So it all adds up together to a pretty layered name, appropriate for such a layered Pokémon. I've always been fond of turtles, and in fact the 4th generation was the first to tempt me away from using a water-type starter for that very reason. Now, having read the Dark Tower series and encountered East Asian Buddhism, I'm tempted to once again take a world turtle with me for my next journey through Sinnoh. Music for Luke Loves Pokémon was composed by Jonathan Cromie. Artwork for the show is by Katie Groves. Writing, producing, and editing is by me, Luke Summerhays. And funding is provided by you lovely listeners on Patreon. Head on over to patreon.com/podcastio-podcastius to find links to the other shows I make, and if you want to, please throw $1 a month our way to help keep things online, and to listen to shows a week early. I love hearing from you guys about why you love these Pokémon too. I was already 16 when I got my hands on Diamond and Pearl, so I'd love to hear some nostalgia from younger listeners, or thoughts and feelings from any of you guys. Hit me up on Twitter or Facebook at LukeLovesPKMN about our next 2 Pokémon, Chimchar and Piplup, or about any other monsters you want to share your love for. And even if you don't feel like doing any of what I just said, thank you so much for listening. I love Turtwig, and remember, I love you too.